A property transaction is a contract, and under contract law, only legal persons can enter into valid and enforceable agreements. Legal persons are natural persons like you and I as human beings. Mr. and Mrs. is a mere social description, not a legal person. So legally speaking, Mr. and Mrs. cannot sue. Mr. and Mrs. cannot be sued. Mr. and Mrs. cannot enforce ownership rights. Are you buying a property owned by Mr. and Mrs. or you intend buying property together with your spouse, or you want to go into a kind of land deal as husband and wife? Then this video is for you. At encumberedproperties.com, our mission is to protect you from hidden property risks that most lawyers may not know about. Let's go straight into these salient truths. Can husband and wife buy property together? Absolutely yes. However, here is where many people get it wrong. For instance, Mr. and Mrs. Madrikenwere is not recognized in law. It sounds normal and socially acceptable, but legally speaking and in contract terms, it is a trap. The courts have been very clear on this issue. For instance, in the case of Osuji and Ekocha, and also in Lion of Africa Insurance Company Limited and Isan, the courts held that Mr. and Mrs. is a mere social description, not a legal person. And here is why that matters. A property transaction is a contract, and under contract law, only legal persons can enter into valid and enforceable agreements. Legal persons are natural persons like you and I as human beings. Also, juristic persons like companies, registered trustees, business names, under the Companies and Allied Matters Act. These are legally recognizable persons. Mr. and Mrs. are none of these. So legally speaking, Mr. and Mrs. cannot sue. Mr. and Mrs. cannot be sued. Mr. and Mrs. cannot enforce ownership rights. Now, just a few days ago, someone I know, he contacted me and forwarded a draft of JV property development agreement. He said he and his wife, they have a property somewhere in Abuja, and a developer is interested, or they're interested in a developer developing, a developer bringing fund, technical know-how, and what have you, while the Mr. and Mrs. contribute their land, then the developer brings in the fund. They agreed on sharing ratio after completion. So he wanted me to review the draft agreement submitted to him by the developer. So amongst other things I noticed, which I took sentiments out and called his attention to, was in the contract and as land contributors to the joint development agreement, he wrote Mr. and Mrs. The name of the landowner, who happens to be my friend. So I had to tell him, amongst other observations, is that Mr. and Mrs. is only a social description. It doesn't amount to a legal person. The problem there is, if along the line the relationship goes sour, the relationship is no longer what the ab initio imagined it to be, and it becomes matter of subjection to court jurisdiction for interpretation of one part of the JV agreement or the other, he and his wife do not amount to legal entity to sue or be sued. So I had to tell him that. Something I want to point out here is this. A lawyer drafted this agreement and submitted to him for approval and for execution. Now you know that it is not every lawyer, with due respect to all lawyers, that is grounded in real estate law. Although this angle has to do with contractual capacity, it has to do with common law of contract. It's either the developer willingly and consciously drafted the name of the land contributor and his wife in a manner that by the end of the road or along the line, this couple won't be able to validly go to court to demand enforcement. Peradventure, the developer defaults along the line. It could be a deliberate attempt to frustrate the due enforcement of the right of the land contributor, who happens to be my friend. Or it could be out of sheer ignorance, with due respect, on the side or on the part of the lawyer who drafted that agreement. So I had to tell him that this won't fly. At the long run, is likely going to, not likely, it might work against him and his wife. Now, the question is, as a husband and wife who are entering into any form of contract deal, whether land deal or otherwise, how are you expected to write your names so that you don't meet with legal hitches or a situation where the enforcement of your rights will be frustrated by this common mistake most spouses make? Now, listen very carefully. As husband and wife who are joint owners, having joint interest in a property or executing any contract for that matter, what you do is, for instance, if it is Mr. and Mrs. Madueke, how it's supposed to be written for it to be enforceable against the two parties, against the spouses, or against the husband and wife, is Mr. Madueke and Mrs. Ann Enwere, that's my wife's name, as joint owners of property so located as so being offered for JV. So in this circumstance, the names of the parties are clearly stated. Also, at the execution level, that is signing, the husband is meant to sign independently, the wife should sign independently and not for or on behalf of the other. This way, the husband and wife are safe together, and the developer or whoever that is entering into the contract with them is also safe to seek to enforce the contract against any of them or both of them. Also, the interest or the ratio of interest of each of the parties has to be stated. Equal ownership, 50-50 ownership, 40-60 ownership. It has to be clearly stated. And along the line, if any of these spouses wants to dispose of his interest or her interest in the property, it is already predetermined what interest he or she is entitled to. Anything could happen along the line. What if the two parties agree to dispose? Fine and good. The two parties should also sign off any document of conveyance transferring the interest in the property to anybody. They should sign independently as well. If only one party wants to dispose of his interest or her interest in the property, is already also known. So if you are a buyer and you come across a deed of assignment or transfer having Mr. and Mrs., due diligence requires you to identify the Mr. and Mrs. that are behind that document. Verify them, get their the two of them, their consent, and let them sign off for you. There is another thing that is important. That is transference or inheritance of the property between these spouses. If, for instance, one dies, how will the property devolve onto the other? Is it by survivorship? Survivorship means that if one dies, automatically the interest of the deceased person is, without further procedure, without any further steps, becomes the property of the survivor. If, for instance, the husband dies, automatically the wife becomes the owner of the interest the husband held before his death. And if it happens to the wife first, the husband survives the wife. It should also be stated, in the absence of survivorship, by inheritance. What this means is that letters of administration has to be obtained by the surviving spouse. And if you are a buyer of a property that is so owned by a husband and wife, what you must do is not rushing into paying or having one person sign off for you on behalf of the other. If one of the spouses is dead and the property is supposed to devolve by inheritance, you must demand to cite letter of administration. There must be letter of administration that now indicates who inherits the portion or the ratio or the right of the deceased spouse. So, in summary, in law, there is no legal identity or legal personality known as Mr. and Mrs. If Mr. and Mrs. are entering into any form of contract, including land transactions, their two names are to be spelled out independently as joint owners or joint developers, depending on the side of the contracts they are coming from. And if all these things are sounding very or too technical to you, I would encourage you to grab our manual, 7 Steps to Acquiring a Clean Property Title. It is a practical checklist. It is designed for property lawyers, real estate consultants. It is also designed for investors like you. Grab a copy now by clicking the link in the description to this video. Peradventure you want a session with me, I'm available for one-on-one session. Also, the link to book a one-on-one session with me is in the description. I would love you to share this video for the interest of those who might not know. It will go a long way avoiding future problems between husband and wife and between contracting parties. And I would love you to follow us on this channel so that you don't miss any of our real estate tips and red alerts that are designed to keep you ahead of real estate scams and common mistakes. I remember I'm a real estate lawyer, a chief superintendent of police, and by God's grace, the founder, Encumberedproperties.com. Encumberedproperties.com remains the only real estate fraud prevention platform. We love you, and indeed, we care about the safety of your real estate investments. Thank you. Till I come your way again.